I am Jeff Foxworthy, and welcome to GameKeeper Podcast. If you want to learn more about farming for wildlife and habitat management, then, buddy, you are in the right place. Join the GameKeeper crew direct from Mossy Oak Land Enhancement Studio as they discuss the latest wildlife and habitat management practices, news, and, of course, hunting. There's no telling what you'll learn, but I'm going to tell you, I bet it's interesting. Enjoy.
We're live in 3, 2, 1.
All right, everybody, here we are. This is going to be a good one.
It's going to be a great one.
It really is.
Yeah.
And I'm excited about it. Well, here we are, West Point, Mississippi, the GameKeeper studio. It's middle of turkey season.
In the heat of it right now.
Everybody's eyes are red.
Yeah, everybody's jealous of other people that are hearing turkeys.
I'm jealous.
Yeah.
The worst thing I dread of all happened as of this morning, though.
You missed one?
No. It's worse than that to me.
You missed two.
The bull gnats hatched out.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
They're so depressing because it affects me.
Oh, it's
I'm
bad.
running for dear life, but it affects turkeys too. I mean,
No doubt about it.
I don't know how long. Well, a good cool morning will set them back some, but right
Well, the
now
mosquitoes were already horrendous.
they are intolerable right now.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and the thermocell doesn't seem to do much
No.
for them.
No, it really works well on the mosquitoes, though. I have to say that.
Yeah, it does.
I'm like a
Yep.
champion.
That's why mosquitoes don't bother me.
Yeah.
They really don't.
But the bull gnats.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
They're relentless.
And anything that you use to keep away from it doesn't last long, and it's only for it seems like just a few minutes.
And I don't remember it being that bad when I was younger. I mean, we would occasionally get these things we called no-see-ums,
No,
which
these
is
are
a
not.
type of gnat.
These are
but
the gnats.
Yep.
these things are bigger,
You can
and they
dang
will
sure see
drive
'em.
you crazy.
So I do this all the time. I did it this morning, get a kick out of it, and I did it as a kid because I guess they were further south. We were in Clark County, Alabama. Was further south. They would hatch or blow in off the Gulf or something. I don't know how they get here, but I would walk along and they would keep on. When I'd walk faster and they'd still be buzzing me, and I'd just stop and back up, and you could see a cloud passing by.
They're trailing you.
Yes, they're trailing that CO2. I'm sure it's like ticks. They're
Gotta be.
following CO2.
Yeah.
I'm sure.
I got bit by one on the lip last year, and it looked like I had been to the dentist to get my teeth pulled.
Talking about red
just
wasp.
swole my whole lip.
Well,
up.
there's really not anything that repels them. I mean, they say different things do. I've got some spray that says it does, but it doesn't.
No.
Sure. All right. Well, let's keep this thing moving. Let's, try to keep us on track
Yeah.
here. We've got, I want to mention Blood on the Biologic.
Absolutely.
It's brought to you by LS Tractors now. So I've got one real quick I'll throw out. There's a guy who comes through here from time to time, John, his son. He's 8 years old.
Oh,
Killed
nice.
his first turkeys. I'm going to say
Turkeys.
get one in Alabama, and he's killed one on the U season in Missouri. His name is John Michael Zimmerman.
Man, he's off to a start.
Yes, he is.
Good
8
for
years
him.
old.
Multi-states.
Yeah, Dudley, you got anybody?
Well, one of my friends that I've met just through the nursery, his name's Will Stevens. He had that photo of the turkeys in that red mulberry that were picking the mulberries
Oh, yeah,
out
that was
of
a
it.
great one.
Well, he got his first turkey for the season, so I'm
that's
sure
good.
that'll be the first of a couple. But
You know,
Good
I think Richie has been going. Richie, have y'all had any luck?
What's been going on, Richie?
We've been giving it a shot though. We're trying, but no luck yet.
No luck yet.
Richie, what happened to the snapping turtle I brought you the other day?
He got dropped off at the river.
Oh, did you bring him a real snapper turtle?
Yeah, a big
Yeah.
old nice one.
Oh, man.
Oh,
Those are
alligator
fun.
snapper
Yeah,
turtle.
yeah.
Yeah, so my
you
dog.
let him go, though, huh?
Yeah, my dog Gus was drinking out of the water bucket he was in, and he gave him a good snap.
Oh, Lord. Lanny, you got anybody to add to it?
Actually, I do. A guy named Floyd Angel that came hunting with us this fall. A gentleman from Illinois killed a big, he calls it a tom up there in Illinois, I think on opening day. And then our buddy, y'all remember Bodoc? Yeah, his son, Ben Bumgarner, is on the board with a nice long beard, I believe, in Noxubee County.
How about that?
how about that?
Actually, I know you won't tell, but how's your spring been so far?
Good.
Yeah.
No-
I got one
no
more,
details.
too.
Go ahead.
Our very own Bobby Cole's on the board.
Well, yeah.
Hey, look at there.
Yeah, that was fun.
Sure
That
did.
was fun. Old man actually catches up one every night. Was a blind hog, finds a nut every
You know, he
now and-
was injured, I will say. And let me tell you what this turkey was doing. Actually, you'll
Oh,
get a
yeah,
kick
you'll
out of
love
this.
this. Talk about
So-
turkey being a turkey.
So when I finally get to see this turkey, he's strutting and he breaks down. And I said, "Oh, he's breeding a hen." And I kind of crawl up where I can see better, and I said, "He is breeding it." And that is
Not a hen.
That is not a hen. And there was a blown over shooting house from the people that we leased this from that had, the shooting house was destroyed, but there was a chair sitting there, a secretary's chair that was falling over on the ground. And this Longbeard was up there.
He was trying to
He had
secure a
fallen
breeding
in love with
opportunity.
this.
He was breeding a chair.
He was breeding a chair. So I said to
I don't
myself,
believe I told that one, brother.
I said
Bobby has a chance with this
I
one.
think I might call this one up. If I sound really good. Boy, he sure enough, he
Come on over there.
He abandoned the chair for what was behind door number 2. So
You sounded better than a chair. Your yelping is coming on.
I guess it is.
It's not a
So
squeaky chair anymore.
that's a true story. I've never seen that before.
Yeah, and he was injured in his breast too. I guess he'd been fighting. Spurred in the breast. and
bird in the
something.
breast. Yeah,
Pretty,
sure
Well,
was.
shot at, who knows?
yeah,
It's
pretty
a
gnarly.
tough world out
Well,
there
good
for
for you,
a turkey.
yeah.
All right, so what else we got? That's all the blood on biologic anybody's got. So let me go ahead and start introducing. We've got a guy. Look, Richie, I'll tell you, since we started this, there were 2 people I wanted to have on this podcast. One of them is Hank Williams Jr., and we can't seem to get in touch with Hank Williams
Hank, if you're
Jr.
listening, give us a shout.
And, we don't want to talk music, Hank. We
No.
want to talk gamekeeping. But the other one is a guy named Shane Mahoney. And in 1988, I traveled to Newfoundland on a hunt. And
Is that how you pronounce it?
Well, that's how I pronounce it, Newfoundland. We'll find out here in a second. But I met a guy named Dave Evans who was my guide, and he and I became fast friends. He's just a great guy. Long story short, he could not stop talking about this young biologist named Shane Mahoney. And that name stuck with me, and ever since I've seen him pop up in so many different places. But that was my first introduction to him. But guys, people that might be listening, if you will just Google Shane Mahoney, it's incredible. I've got they sent me a way to introduce him, and it's so long. But let me just kind of cut to the core that this guy, he is such a pure conservationist. He was from very humble roots as a young boy. He's just fallen in love with animals and wildlife and conservation. He's a biologist. He worked for the Newfoundland Wildlife Department. I'm mispronouncing that, I know. He's been on numerous documentaries, television shows, written hundreds of articles. He's just unbelievable. And I could go on and on and on, but let's just get right to him. And Shane Mahoney, we are so excited to have you.
Well, I'm delighted to be here. You seem to be having a lot of fun, so I'm looking forward to this discussion very much. Thanks for finally tracking me down.
Well, look, I want to give a thank you to Amanda, who works there with you, and she helped me set all this up. She just did a fantastic job. But, seriously, I've heard about you for a long time, and you've been such a force in conservation that it's time.
I just made the observation because I'm a brand guy. That's what I do. Whatever, create, manage, whatever, try to have them be around for the ages. But branding is so important. And so just to hear my point saying that, his voice is a brand into itself. The instant you hear his voice, you think of all the important things going on in the earth and ecology and conservation. So I just wanted to commend you. I don't know if anybody's ever told you that, but having not spent any time with you before, but being very familiar with you, when I hear your voice, it's already a brand to do the right thing. And I think that's really cool.
That is.
Well, that's very kind of you to say. Thanks very much. I appreciate that.
Well, Mr. Mahoney, we want to start here, and this can go in a lot of different directions, and I see us doing this a couple of times to cover all the things that we need to cover, but conservation has such a history in the United States, or North America, I should say, and I kind of look back at kind of Teddy Roosevelt and the Boone and Crockett Club, and we've come a long way, and we've got a long way to go, and I noticed in a lot of your communications, you say one natural world, one humanity, and one chance.
Amen.
And boy, I mean, it's just like we have found. I don't know, the Dalai Lama. I don't know how to say it, but could you just kind of give us? Let's talk about the North American model of wildlife conservation.
Well, first of all, the little motto that I use, one natural world, one humanity, one chance, is meant to underscore, I guess, a little bit about what all of you were talking about in the intro and what Toxie was emphasizing. And I believe ultimately that the only future we have for conservation is based on citizenship. That ultimately, if we can make the citizens of all countries, and all citizens are proud of their countries, of course, if we can make all citizens of all countries feel that conservation is part of their role and responsibilities as citizens, then I think we have a real fighting chance on doing the right things for this planet and for wildlife and for people. I feel if we fail in that mission, then I think we're going to find it very difficult to look to governments or institutions or world banks or whatever it might be to make the rescue possible. So that's why the motto is what it is. And the reason my organization is called Conservation Visions in the plural is also relevant. I didn't say conservation vision, I said conservation visions. That's what I named the organization after I left government. And that's because I believe there are a lot of different pathways for individuals to find their way to conservation. A lot of us can do it through hunting and angling. That's certainly true, but there's lots of people who find their way through that through their own home gardens, just growing their own vegetables, just growing their own fruits. There, little children who catch live things in jars just to look at them, who may not necessarily go on to become hunters later in life. People who perhaps have gotten ill and who find real spiritual and even emotional and medical, in some cases, recovery in the natural world. These are all pathways to discovering that conservation matters. And that's another motto that I use, that conservation really does matter because all of our futures are tied to it in one way or another. And those of us who discover it early in our lives, as probably all of you did, and certainly as I did as a very small human, we're especially fortunate, I think, because we get to have that experience and that sort of guiding light in our lives for a much longer period of time. And that's a great gift that's been given to some of us that we ought to be thankful for. The North American model, well, it's an interesting thing. It takes a long time sometimes for good ideas to mature to a point where they start to make a difference. I'm sure that's true in business, and it's true in our personal lives often, in our family lives, in our communities' lives. And it's also true with this idea of conservation, because we began a very long time ago, as hunter-gatherer societies. We had, of course, everywhere the idea that conservation really mattered. We lived within nature, and we went so far, of course, in our relationship with nature as to describe all other living beings as brothers or cousins, or, we really believed that we were one animal amongst many. And for a long period of time, 95% of our time on the planet as humans, that's what and how we lived. And then we developed agriculture about 10,000 years ago, and we started to settle down into places and create very different communities and very different civilizations. And we began to distance ourselves more and more and more from nature. And that process continued, obviously, for a relatively long time. 10,000 years is quite a period of time. And then finally, we had this idea that we kind of became this super animal, and we could just go out and do whatever we really liked. Mm-hmm. And in some cases, this was guided by philosophical doctrines, and in some cases, it was also guided by religious doctrines. In some cases, that we could sort of I think we misread a lot of religious teachings in some ways, in that I don't really think dominion ever meant that we should just go out and take whatever we wanted to take. And yet that's kind of how it moved along for a period of time. And when we came to North America as Europeans, we met 350 different languages already being spoken here. Wow. By civilizations that were far advanced than those in Europe. The Spanish, the French, the English who came, they all marveled at the complex civilizations that the Native Americans had, and the cleanliness in which they lived, and the size of these people that lived here, the sheer physical size of them. Most of the Europeans came in at about 5'4", and they were often looking up at 6 and 6'1" tall Native Americans, and they, in some cases, actually thought they were giants. And then, we went through a phase, therefore, we know the history of that conflict and the difficulties that arose. And we know we went through a phase ourselves then as European colonizers or European, explorers. We came through a phase of believing that the wildlife on this continent was just unlimited. I mean, most of our forefathers came from places where the cities were filthy. Wildlife had been moved and taken and had become scarce or only existed on the land holdings of nobility. And so they never had this experience of walking around every day and, hearing turkeys or seeing doves flying or seeing eagles out over the river or ospreys or whatever it might be. They just never seen anything like this. And so they came to North America and they saw this continent that just seemed to go on forever. And they encountered things like passenger pigeons flying in flocks of up to 3 billion birds that took 5 days to actually clear the skies above a community. Wow. Turning daytime into nighttime for 5 consecutive days, the size of their flocks. They saw the bison, of course, as they moved even in the east, but then into the Midwest and the West. They saw these 30 to 60 million of these massive animals, teeming on the plains. They just couldn't believe it. And they certainly couldn't believe they could ever destroy it, ever draw it down. But by post-Civil War in the United States, by the 1880s, it was clear that not only had a lot of the Native Americans died, but that a lot of the species that we were harvesting at, just this unrelenting rate, whether it was bison or passenger pigeons or waterfowl or shorebirds, or even little birds, little dicky birds, little songbirds, it became clear that we were losing them. Rivers were blocked with wood. The great runs of salmon and sea trout and char and so on were now blocked. The forest had largely been cleared in a lot of places. And we did it very quickly because, as humans, we're capable of doing things like that very quickly once we put our minds to it. And so there was an awakening. And, that awakening was that partly it was a conservation ethic in the sense that people were concerned about wildlife. Part of it was the idea of nationhood, particularly in the United States, where many Americans at that time, because people were calling themselves Americans by that time, realized that, your country and Canada the same, we didn't have the big museums of Europe. We didn't have the big palaces. We didn't have the centuries old institutions, the great basilicas, the great cathedrals, and all of that. But what we did have was a continent that was mystifyingly beautiful, that was so overwhelmingly full of life that those places were to become our cathedrals and our palaces and our places. And this was a way of, in a sense, showing the Europeans that, we were capable of doing something that they had failed to do, and that we were going to conserve nature in a way that they had never done. So it was a mixture of, conservation and nationhood, the idea, not nationalism. There's a big difference between nationalism and the idea of nationhood. And this combination really set in motion, eventually a system of laws and policies and institutions that we came to understand as the North American model, which was first described, only about 25 years ago. And a lot of people remember the big names who moved and shook this kind of revolution in thinking, the Teddy Roosevelts and the Gifford Pinchots and the George Bird Grinnells and the Hornadays and the Muirs and the Burroughs and these big, the Audubons, these big giant names. But at the time of the Civil War in the United States of America, there were already about 500 sort of hunting and fishing clubs established in the United States. And not all of them were really conservation minded, but lots of them were. They were concerned about depletion, and they wanted to have enforcement of the few game laws that existed and so on and so forth. And so there was this, primordial group of hunter conservationist kind of organizations, and some that weren't hunting oriented, but most of them were, who really began to develop a brand new ethic in the United States of America that spread to Canada. And that ethic included a lot of things like fair chase hunting, the elimination of game markets where huge numbers of animals will be slaughtered and sold in restaurants or sold in marketplaces, the massive killing of bison just for their tongues or just for their hides or whatever it might be. And we developed this approach to conservation, which really had sustainable use of wildlife at its core. And that's one of the hallmarks of the North American model. And if you reflect on it for a moment, it was a pretty incredible thing that a very young society, a very young country of the United States, because Canada was still tied to Britain. So we kind of had that, that big anchor across the ocean. But a very young United States of America, faced with the problem that we were slaughtering wildlife to extinction, instead of stopping all killing of wildlife, all harvesting of wildlife, the choice that was made was to make the harvesting of wildlife the actual core means of recovery. Now, I consider that to be kind of a stroke of genius, frankly. Because the simple thing would have been to say, okay, well, we're killing too many. Let's stop all this hunting for 10, 15, or 20 years, or whatever it might have been. But anyway, the North American model stands today with enormous numbers of successes, which we can get into at some point if you wish. But it really is this entire system that we have now in Canada and the United States that we share, of policies and laws and institutions that safeguard wildlife. And 150 years later, the hunting community and the angling communities remain part of the spinal column of that model. That doesn't mean that other people, including people who don't hunt, have not made contributions. They have, and will continue to do so. But there's also no denying the force that hunting has been in the conservation of American wildlife.
Yeah,
Wow.
you can't.
No.
Look,
I didn't realize the scope. I mean,
that was
good
that
grief.
was great for so many reasons. Just for ourselves here, but then our audience, just the historical perspective.
Yeah,
It's so meaningful to see, because we don't stop to think, where do we fit in with all this? We've got all this stuff going on today, and it makes
Where'd
me
it come
really
from?
proud of where we are and what we're doing here at Mossy Oak. It really, really does. But to hear him and to know, we're visiting with someone who is as an historian as there is on this topic and putting it all in perspective. Mm-hmm. When you love something, and I was just thinking about there's a million definitions of love, but I'll just go back to Corinthians in the Bible. When you love something, you just find a way. And so the people that pioneered, he called it, a miracle or a stroke of genius or whatever. It's because they genuinely loved the earth and the critters. I mean, there wasn't, you know, the creators of this system didn't have a selfish agenda. What I love, I remind people all the time, and the word conservation puts it in context for you, because right there in the middle, conservation, it's about a servant spirit to the earth, and it's about serving, and it says it right there in the middle of the word for all to see.
Hey, this is Mac. Checking game cameras is one of the many pleasures I get from gamekeeping. OnX helps keep track of my camera locations to be sure I'm getting the information that I need to make the best decisions for the wildlife. Try it out for yourself and see. Use coupon code MossyOak to save 20% on your OnX subscriptions. Know where you stand.
So let me input here that, you know, everything isn't rosy though.
No.
I mean, Toxic,
no.
if you think, if you, I'm gonna get Mr. Mahoney explain what's going on here. But if you'll remember back at the very first Mossy Oak Hunt in the Country television show, you and I and Cuz went to Canada and we hunted the Quebec Labrador caribou, and there were millions of them, and they were people were traveling up there on buses, and you could kill two, and now that herd, Toxic, I don't know if you're aware of this, that herd is almost non-existent.
Wow. But not from hunting.
Not from hunting, though. No, but Mr. Mahoney, could you kind of tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right. I mean, one of the most recent alarming large-scale phenomenons with regard to wildlife in North America has been this massive decrease of caribou all across the range, all the way from the island of Newfoundland right up through Labrador and Quebec, and essentially right across the continent to British Columbia and then up to Alaska. This massive decline in animals, first of all, is extraordinary for its scale. The George River caribou population, which may have been the ones that you were hunting at the time, I'm not sure.
We were.
Yeah, the George River population peaked at about 750,000 animals, and it is now less than 10,000.
Oh, wow.
The population. Many other populations have encountered this same range of decline, not all of them, but the vast majority of them. What's important to understand is that animal populations will go through these cycles. People get used to it with, say, snowshoe hares and lynx. They get used to it with lemmings. They get used to it with other critters as well, and they get used to it with cicadas that explode every 16 or 17 years, and then they're gone. So these big dynamics take place in wildlife populations, and what very few people know is that about 100 years ago, the exact same thing happened to all these caribou populations. And we now understand that caribou are on a kind of 60 to 90 year cycle of abundance and loss of numbers. And very seldom have those big declines in caribou ever been due to hunting. And the reason that it's been so rare in the case of caribou has been the regions of the world they exist in, mostly the northern and subarctic regions. Hunting played a role in some of the smaller populations in the United States-Canadian border areas. But in the big northern herds, there were always very few people, right? And those very few people harvested caribou and relied on them, but they were never able to mount the kind of, over-harvest that was possible. So what really happened with the caribou populations is, and we know this well from research I did on Newfoundland for 30 years into what was happening there on the animals there. We know that these caribou populations, particularly in wintertime, but also in summer, rely on a lot of very slow growing plants like lichens that take a long time to build up and mature. The caribou moss, as it's often called. When those caribou populations rise to a certain peak and they deplete those food resources, a syndrome sets in where, first of all, females and males both shrink in size. In the case of males, their antlers are reduced. In the case of females, they often skip pregnancies or are later getting pregnant. Instead of being pregnant at 1 year of age, they're not pregnant until they're 2 or 3. Then the calves are born smaller. And when those calves come down to levels of, less than about 5 pounds or so, very, very few of them survive. Predators will take them, but it doesn't matter. Something is going to kill them before they survive. So it's kind of like having a bank account where you're not putting any money in. In other words, no new calves are entering the population, and your capital that you have in the bank is getting less and less because they're dying. You're drawing it out all the time, and so the end result is that your caribou populations start to decline. And the real trick with hunting in those circumstances, there's two things. One is you need to keep those populations a lot lower than those peak numbers. If you let them get above about 60% of the peak number they can reach, they are inevitably going to go through those long-term declines. And they will be down now for 30 years or more. So you will never see, most likely in your lifetimes, the recovery of those populations back to what you experienced when you hunted them. And the second thing is that if you don't keep them low, and if you keep hunting them at the same level as they start to naturally decline, then of course you only increase the rate of the decline of those herds. The really significant thing about caribou, of course, is that in many cases now the populations are either threatened or classified as endangered under Endangered Species Acts in Canada and the United States. And they represent the very first game species in recent times to have entered that territory. And what a lot of people don't realize is that if the United States and Canada had Endangered Species Acts in, say, 1890 or 1900 or 1910 or 1920, all the species that you see around you there on your desks and on your walls and so on, they all would have been on it. Mule deer, whitetails, elk, black bear,
wild turkeys.
Oh, yeah.
All of them would have been listed under the Endangered Species Act. And that's pretty significant because, once they get listed under the Endangered Species Act like that, then hunting generally stops.
Yes.
So if there had been an act at that time, it would almost have been certain that hunting for most of these species would have ended for some period of time until they recovered. As I said, it was an act of genius on the part of the people at the time that they didn't call for something like an Endangered Species Act. Not that I think that act doesn't have good merit, but instead of going that route, they said, let's reduce the harvests. Let's bring in things like the Lacey Act, which prevents poached animals from being moved across lines. Let's stop the sale of wildlife, etc. Reduce the harvest and use the incentivized hunting community to make sure that wildlife is actually protected. And of course, we brought those populations of mule deer and whitetails and elk and Canada geese and wood duck and most of them we brought back to abundance. And the caribou really represent the first of the big game species, the only one really that has, across its range, entered this really, really depleted kind of circumstance. Certainly the only large one.
Yeah, that's very interesting how such a large population in an undisturbed area can fluctuate so much.
Tell you the importance of food sources,
it's
though.
kind of like, around here, the raccoons fluctuate because of that distemper disease. But I always assume that had some kind of human interference. You build roads, you build houses, you till everything, you do this and that, and that makes it more understandable. But that's a natural, vast, dynamic range of population.
We throw a term around a lot, carrying capacity.
That's exactly what I was
thinking.
thinking.
And that's exactly what he described as an outstripping of the carrying capacity. In many cases, our hunting is a pursuit of balance. So that does not happen. Of course, it's not a perfect science either because it's done like state by state, county by county, country by country. But in most cases, in our world, we're able to keep, in our states and our biologists are able to keep designs on what's going on so that we can, hunt to maximize the health of the population. That is the magic of the whole system. But when you get natural events of that giant of a magnitude shifting, I mean, it just goes to show you that Mother Nature's in charge.
Oh, yeah.
And, the other thing that occurred to me when listening to him was that when it comes to the point that we've got to make a sacrifice, let's just say ducks got in so much trouble, they said no season for 3 years. I mean, that'd be awful. It's just not being able to go. It's not really about killing them almost, but or they said, 2 per day instead of 6 or something like that. It's time to, to put up and shut up, or whatever the words are for that. It's like, it gives us a chance to prove that we really, really love these species, these animals that we live for. And so we do what, if we really are what we proclaim, then we as hunters, as, sportsmen, and even as anglers in the fishing world, we do whatever it takes for that. Fortunately, if we behave within the plan, then unless there's some big natural phenomena, a big disease or a shift in something, carrying capacity like you described, then we get to enjoy that. But, I tell you one thing to listen to him also, being so global and historical in his knowledge, is that I say all the time that one of the great gifts you can have from a life of wildlife and abundance there is to have a heart of gratitude every day for all this stuff and not take it for granted. As he described a lot of times in history, when we take it for granted is when we get punished. And so knowing that we're living in the good old days right now for so many species, we should be so grateful for what we have. And I mean, every day, we got a limited amount of days. Every day you can live with a heart of gratitude is a day not wasted. Every day you don't is a day wasted. And so it just makes me, in a very wordy way, thank you for listening, so grateful for what we have. I mean, so grateful. And so I cherish it. I mean, it just makes you want to dig in and work harder for all the stuff we're doing.
No doubt.
It's interesting how we, originally did these, regulations and things. You can't take as many of this animal. But nowadays we've thrown the habitat into the mix. So, we have harvest regulations, but as time goes on, we seem to be getting better at knowing, learning more about these animals' homes and what they actually need to survive and thrive. So,
and I think we're looking at, like on the ground experience too. So we're not looking, I used to look at game laws as that's what I got to do, but it's really just a guideline. You really need to use your own judgment on what you got going on in your place, depending on the habitat and the wildlife, to make your own decisions,
Exactly.
So, and today, Mr. Mahoney, we've got a television show. You being in Canada, you probably don't get to watch it. But it's called The GameKeepers of Mossy Oak, and we shine a light on a lot of these biologists that are doing just incredible work, whether it's with pronghorns or wild turkeys or
bears.
Yes,
wild deer, quail.
So our show sometimes doesn't have any hunting on it at all. It's just about the animals and these people that have dedicated their lives. I mean, back in the day when they were in Newfoundland, when you were a biologist, you would have been a perfect candidate to have been on the show.
Mm-hmm. Of course you would have.
Well, I mean, I think this idea of being grateful, I think, unfortunately, a lot of people don't know the history of crisis that we came through to do what we did. And also, a very wide spectrum of American society, and I'll speak about American society in this case because primarily, I guess, a United States audience listening here, but we can reference North American. It's probably all the same. All the people who do not hunt or fish, and hunters only represent about 3.5% to 4% of the population of the United States of America and Canada at the present time. So that means that approximately 96% of people in both countries don't hunt. But that doesn't mean that they haven't been also beneficiaries of the systems that were put in place. because everybody who bird watches, everybody who, enters nature at all, whether they're kayakers or backpackers or people who just want to go out for a picnic or berry picking or whatever they want to do. You ask any of those people, so what was the best part of your day? They may have canoed 15 to 20 miles of the most beautiful river in the world, all the colors of autumn there, or the flush of spring. They may have camped in the most beautiful oasis that it's possible to imagine. They may have had any other kind of experience, mountain climbing or whatever they may have been doing in the natural world. But I guarantee you that 95 to 99% of those people, when they tell you the most important thing that they experienced in their trip outdoors or their venture afield, will be the wild animals they saw.
Mm-hmm.
And that might be a big, majestic animal like a bull elk lifting his head out of a stream. It could be the flash of big fish like salmon or something of that nature making their way through the water. But it might also be just a small hawk that they saw take another small bird in flight. Or it could be just some rare species that they didn't expect to see, like a great wading bird, walking through the shallows and feeding on minnows or frogs or something of this nature. You can maintain all the land you want. We can maintain mountains and valleys, and we can even recreate land with plantations of longleaf pine or loblolly pine or whatever we want to be talking about, oaks or anything, cypress. But if there's no wildlife on that land, there's something essentially missing. And almost all people are the same this way. They have an absolutely natural affinity for, a fascination for the other animals that we have shared this planet with for as long as we have been around. And many of them have been around a lot longer than us. And, whatever was done to make sure that we didn't lose elk and we didn't lose black bear. And when I say lose, I mean lose forever, like we lost Carolina parakeets and like we lost sea mink and like we lost the passenger pigeon and many, many other species that went extinct. Whatever the mechanism was, and we call it the model as a significant part of it, every citizen in our countries have benefited, not just the hunters and anglers. And that's a message that's very seldom explained to the publics of our countries.
Wow,
that's a great point. One thing I've made a note of early on, he said, he kind of highlighted it there too. And he said at one time we kind of got carried away reading the word domain, that we have domain over this earth. And I would just say to everybody that hears that's in the voice of Mossy Oak out there, the word domain in the context of that in the Bible means responsibility. Doesn't mean egocentric command of whatever I want. It means responsibility. Mm-hmm. And so if we handle that domain we have the responsibility. I mean, when you have the responsibility for something, you take it to heart. You don't push it off on someone else or, pass the buck down the road or blame somebody else for the issues and problems. You take that on yourself.
Yeah, that's a good point. Dudley, I know you got a lot of questions you'd like to ask him. Why don't you fire one?
Well, I am, I mentioned the regulations and things earlier. Like Bobby said, we have a lot of biologists come on our podcast. We all love reading these peer-reviewed publications and all of their studies. What do you have to say about the fact that in states and provinces, a lot of the regulations are brought on by politicians, and they seem to have the final say, even though these people that we trust are providing these studies that may show a state or province doesn't need to introduce this or introduce that. What do you have to say about that?
Well, that's a complicated piece of business, isn't it?
Dudley starts with a good one.
And we have to remember that, we do have political systems, first of all, and they're imperfect, and they're imperfect in every country. They're individuals, they're human beings. And so by definition, our political systems are imperfect. But in the end, there has to be some system that adjudicates between opinions, and opinions can be non-scientific opinions. They can be local knowledge opinions. They can be just what a local sportsman knows about his particular area and he believes or she believes to be true. In the scientific community, believe me, there are lots of opinions in the scientific community. I published in 25 or more peer-reviewed journals. So I know how that community works. And by the way, it's also very political.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I don't think that ain't a political beehive, because it sure as hell is. And so we have these layers of knowledge, if you will, different kinds of knowledge. And very often we will say, those of us in support of, say, the North American model, that, we want to rely on science because that's one of the principles of the model. And that's also called the Roosevelt Doctrine, because Theodore Roosevelt was the first one to really say, that's how we're going to manage wildlife. We're going to manage it based on science, not an opinion. But ultimately, of course, there have to be laws. There have to be pieces of legislation that set those best opinions and best knowledge into some form of practice, and practice that is enforceable, because you have to have laws and then you have to have means of enforcing them, conservation officers or policemen or whatever the circumstance may be. And it is true that because it's an imperfect system, there's always a debate as to which information ultimately is going to influence the politicians or the legislators the most. And sometimes that doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. But I think we have to be careful and remember that a lot of times, over a long period of time, it has made a lot of sense, and that there were a lot of extremely good laws put in place.
True.
If, for example, the Lacey Act, 115 years ago approximately, had not been brought into play, which forbid the transportation of illegally harvested wildlife across state lines, if that one piece of legislation had not been put in place, I doubt very much we would have saved wildlife on this continent.
Mm-hmm.
If the Pittman-Robertson Act had not been brought in 1937, which applied the excise taxes to the procurement of firearms and ammunition and other kinds of products associated with hunting and shooting, had not been brought in, then the entire system of state wildlife management and support in the United States of America would never have existed as we know it today. And I know lots of people in every state, because I travel to every state. I'm in your country 20 times a year. So I just got back from 3 weeks of travel through Texas, Idaho, and Missouri. And so I know that there's, naturally in every state, there's tensions and there's differences of opinion. But if you take the long view of it, a lot of the legislation has been very good, and not just hunting legislation, but who in the United States of America today would say that you shouldn't have passed the Clean Water Act? Right? There have been some really monumentally good pieces of legislation. That doesn't mean, to your point, that there aren't mistakes made, and that doesn't mean, to your point, that sometimes science or best information doesn't seem to be lost and there's a political solution found that's not necessarily in the best interest of wildlife and people. That can happen, and it does happen. But I'm a big believer that, we kind of have democracy, and then we have everything else. And in my experiences around the world, and I've seen a lot of this world, I've traveled most of this world, I really think there's democracy and nothing else. So I know democracy is not perfect, but that's really at the heart of your question, I think. In some cases, we're going to end up, hopefully most of the time, with good people in politics on any side of any aisle. There are good people everywhere. There's also Nimrods on each side of the aisle. And we can't change that, unfortunately, but that's true in every country. But on balance, the laws and regulations that we did bring in have been critical to the recovery of the wildlife species we have. And I just, ask everyone here on the panel and producing this show and everyone in the audience to just think about an America without wild turkeys. Think about an America without elk. Think about an America without black bears and grizzly bears. Think about an America without wood ducks. It's almost impossible, isn't it, to think about that?
I sure don't want to
painful.
think about it. Yeah.
But that could very well have been
Yeah.
your country, and it could have been Canada too. So I very much take your point that at times there's too much politics involved in decision making. But I also believe that there's been a lot of good come out of the legislative system. I will say this, that I've many times said that we must be careful not to bring the standards of politics to bear on conservation, but we must bring the standards of conservation to bear upon politics.
Amen.
Come on
from
with
the
that.
choir right there.
Yeah, perfect way to clarify that.
Absolutely.
That's real. That's
Yeah.
real.
Wow. Lanny, your eyes are twinkling. I know you got a question.
Yeah. I was just listening to you, talk about, people's other experiences in the outdoors, and it is even for me where I'm immersed in wild places, but. When I saw a Mississippi kite the other day, and I'm, talking to Dudley about it, oh my goodness, you wouldn't see over my house, there was a Mississippi kite. So that wonderment of wildlife is something that we talk about often around here.
Yes.
And such an important part of everything. But you mentioned something else too that really struck home with me, that while, only 3 to 4% of the American population hunts or fishes, I think I read a stat at some point that, over 80-90% of the people polled are in support of ethically harvested wildlife as a food source. And I was noticing, some information about your Wild Harvest Initiative, and maybe you can enlighten us maybe on what that is and what it's attempting to do.
Absolutely. First of all, I've spent all of my life in defense of animals. Obviously, I'm a hunter and an angler, so when I say in defense of them, I don't believe in the use of wildlife, because I believe I believe human beings have only two choices. No disrespect to anyone in terms of their religious views and so on and so forth. I was raised in a very devout Roman Catholic family, but I'm more of a Celt in my religion. My religion is the earth, and that's just where I've landed, and it's where everybody else lands is absolutely fine with me. But I have been in working for animals all my life, and I will do it till the day I die. And I find the idea that human beings should somehow not be involved in, at the same time, the harvesting and the rescuing of wildlife, or that we should step outside the use of wildlife as a natural thing to do. I find that just absolutely absurd. I think we have an ecology on this planet, and the ecology on that planet, of course, is to live within the systems of nature, to rely on fresh water and clean air and healthy ecosystems. And I firmly believe that we need to recognize that explaining that to people in a modern society is not as easy as it used to be. When most people raised animals themselves for food, even if it was just as we did when we grew up, we had a few sheep, or we had one cow, or whatever it might be, and hunted and fished, it was pretty easy to explain to people that that's how you live, that's how you had to live. There was no other alternative. We have a modern society now, the vast majority of people living in cities and often separated from nature and certainly separated from animal death. And as a result of that, a lot of people develop different viewpoints. And a lot of them feel that, there's a choice for us, that we can either use wildlife and nature or not use it. Well, there's only two choices for us, and they both involve use. We either use nature sustainably or we use nature unsustainably. But there is no third option, that we don't use it at all. So I've spent a lot of time trying to convince people of these arguments. And what I have discovered over a lifetime of debate and discussion and writing and lecturing is that you have to find a way into people's hearts and minds. And their hearts and minds can be quite different from your own. They don't necessarily see the world in the same way you do. And the other thing that I discovered is that I was always in my efforts, I always seemed to be fighting against some social trend, like, oh, this social trend was moving, say, the animal rights movement or the non-use movement or whatever it might have been. I was always trying to fight and muster arguments around those oppositions. And then I started to think, well, isn't there a way to ride this tide of change in society somehow? And rather than fighting against emerging opinions, find an opinion that's emerging in society already that we can sort of hitch our pony to, or our wagon to. And I looked around. I took a year after I left government before I set up Conservation Visions, and this was my search. And the one major trend that I found across the planet was the emphasis on health, longevity, happiness, healthy food, all a healthy lifestyle. This whole idea of, in some cases, a bit absurd, wanting to live forever or whatever. But there was this big trend. You see it everywhere. You see it in downtown cities. You see it in rural communities. You see, people in Newfoundland never really walked in their communities except if they were walking a horse with wood or walking down to their boats. I mean, doing something purposeful, working at walking. Now we have tons of people that are out there just walking around, in the evening time to get their exercise, so to speak. So I was searching for something like that. And when I found that, I said, okay, food, healthy food is a preoccupation for a lot of those people in society that often the hunting and conservation community find hard to reach.
Yeah.
And then I asked myself, well, we have, 40 million people in Canada and the United States who every year hunt or fish. Right. 40 million who or fish. And I said, I wonder, has anybody ever figured out how much wild food they harvest? And I thought first, and I tell this to all of you here honestly, I thought for sure that had been done. I just couldn't believe that, in 125 years of this kind of model, that nobody had ever tried to figure out how much wild food we were harvesting. And I found out that no one had ever tried to do that. And I also found out something also very interesting, that nobody could tell me, and I didn't know it myself, even how many species we hunted in Canada and the United States, or how many species we fished for in Canada and the United States. No state agency could tell me this. No non-governmental organization could tell me this. Some of them might tell me about their specific thing, like Ducks Unlimited might know how many ducks, and the Elk Foundation might know, but nobody had ever put this information together. So I launched this Wild Harvest Initiative because I believe that the entire future of hunting rests on one thing, and one thing only. If we do not convince a modern society that hunting is justified, is relevant, is appropriate because we harvest the food, we will never convince society of any other reason or justification or relevance for hunting. The entire future of your way of life, of what you wish to pass on to your children, of what your fathers and mothers lived and your grandfathers and mine lived in this space of sustainably utilizing nature, whether it was the fishing communities like Newfoundland is famous for, or whatever. That is now all dependent on the idea that the primary value, the primary and best use and justification for hunting is that we consume the animals that we harvest. And I predict that all other forms of hunting will virtually disappear or become so small and sequestered that they won't really matter. And they certainly won't be able to keep hunting alive. The hunting for food movement is the only tide that will rise all boats in the hunting community around the world.
Wow.
I couldn't agree more.
Wow.
We talk about it all the time here about, to us, our biggest recruitment tool is the food on the plate. You know, the best way for us to introduce somebody into our lifestyle and into hunting, into fishing is through their palate. It really is. So thank you.
Absolutely.
So
I'd love to. I know you're trying to.
I think that you know, you see duck mounts and deer mounts and fish mounts in here. I think that can be a subset of that, but I could not agree more that and I, you know, so I can look back to the 90s and I used to say, and I have to be careful, you know, I'm not trying to judge everybody else, but the truth is the truth, you know, regardless, even if it's me and I don't like it, it is the truth. But we were literally eating our own young as hunters.
Yeah.
Every magazine you picked up had your whitetail patterning techniques and rattling techniques and scoring points. And I mean, you know, and I'm not judging that. I'm not saying, in fact, you know, I get excited about big deer. But
everybody does.
He's got it right. It has to be a subset of doing the right thing first, of caring for, you know, every gram of meat and, you know, putting it to your use or someone's use that you get from that, to, you know, living a life, you know, of abundance, but of, you know, sustaining and managing and trying to achieve balance in the area that you know, hunt and fish and that you're responsible for. So I couldn't agree more. And I think we have made progress. I personally see the whole 911 era started a bit of a shift to where it silenced more of the you know, a lot of the anti-hunting people and animal rights people really were just kind of to make money as opposed to do anything productive. Mm-hmm. That kind of silence, I think hunters kind of came around more. And, you know, I even in the real estate part of stuff we do, I see more and more people wanting to buy their own little piece of nature instead of maybe traveling the world and, you know, people of wealth. I just see those trends and a lot of the things happening today. Even COVID kicked that in gear.
Pushed it
even further, because now businesses that are out in space that have to do with being out in space coming out of COVID are prospering. I mean, greatly. When even to the point of sports like golf is played out in space, and now golf's growing like it hadn't in, you know, 30 years.
Yep.
So I think it would be so healthy for us to continue to evolve down that road and make. And, you know, that's why we constantly are working with wild game chefs and recipes and, you know, a lot of the initiatives
vacuum
that we
sealers.
have. Yeah, absolutely. and honestly, you know, you'll be proud to know that so many especially across this part of the country, of hunters would actually rather go work on their place, would rather plant and establish habitat or food plots or doing things to improve for wildlife. They would actually rather do that than go shoot one. And I'm one of those people. Now, I enjoy it all, but that's my favorite thing, that connection with the earth. But also more and more and more is it's become almost a prideful thing, you know, and it's okay if a prideful thing isn't selfish pride and it's driving a great result. In other words, I'm taking great pride in my wildlife and what's going on. And I take great pride in eating all natural wild game. My son Daniel, who's going to faint when he hears this because he is so aligned with how you think, he's basically, if he could be, a forager at heart. He wants to not eat any hamburger in the store. He wants to be all, if he kills elk or deer, he wants it ground, just pure the meat. He's become a purist. And it's not just that he loves it because he takes pride in it too, but he also has the connection with the health of that.
It's interesting how we, referring to all of us in this room, we grew up hunting and fishing.
That's all we know. Right.
We did it because our parents and friends did it, and because it was fun. And yes, we also ate the meat.
Yes.
But we hit on it a minute ago that there's a lot of new hunters that used to be non-hunters, and they're doing it solely for the meat.
Yeah,
and then they realize how much fun they're having
how great
outdoors.
it is.
I like going and walking on trails and looking at the beach and stuff like that too, but I really enjoy the act of the hunt.
I like my trophy room's my freezer. I mean, there's no doubt about it. The most pride I get is feeding my kids and seeing my kids, seeing your child. I'm lucky enough to have a child that age and actually harvest something. You've been through this with your kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
But when they're the provider in the family, you change to them. But circling back to your wild harvest initiative, so you're trying to quantify that, aren't you? Like the amount of, not only the amount of that that's going on, but the economic impact that has and everything else on the North American scale, which is huge, because I can't even get my mind around it, how important that's going to be for the future of hunting.
Well, we're actually well into it now. I mean, I started this about 7 years ago, and we now have the largest database in the entire world on the recreational harvest of wildlife. Wow. Our database and our reports are now used by the International Convention on Biodiversity, by CITES, the Convention on the International Trade in Endangered Species. We now know, for example, that we have the data from every state and every province on every species for the period between 2014 and 2019. And this is a living database, which I will continue for as long as I can, and then I will turn it over to someone else to run. In that database, for the first time, I'm able to tell you right across the two countries and in every state and in every province, how many species, how many individuals of each species. I can also tell you what the total mass or the biomass of the harvest of all those species has been in any given year. Wow. For any given species. We have also determined from the scientific literature the consumable weights of every single species that's hunted in Canada and the United States. And by the way, there are 126 species that are hunted. I can tell you the amount of wild food that's generated in every single state and every single province. And I can tell you the total amount and number of animals that are harvested on a yearly average. In the United States of America, you will harvest 68 million wild animals. And those 68 million wild animals will provide about 604 million pounds of wild meat. And if you went to try to replace that wild meat that's harvested annually in the United States with the traditional consumption patterns of Americans dealing with, say, beef, pork, chicken, that kind of thing, that trade-off would cost American citizens, American families, $2 billion.
Wow.
Hunting went away tomorrow. We have millions of statistics like this now at our disposal, and we're starting to enter phase 2, which we'll see. We now have a partnership and alliance of 45 organizations that include state governments, non-governmental organizations, business partners, private philanthropists, and we're just about to sign. I'll be in Paris 2 weeks from now. We will bring our first European partner into this, and we're going to move this to the European continent as well. And so we have taken, the idea of saying wild meat is important is one thing. Showing game dinners are important. They show it actually happening. But you will not affect policy or legislation without data, which comes back to an earlier question. And we are the only ones. The Wild Harvest Initiative is the only program that anyone is undertaking to get at this question. And this will be the program that will rise all boats in hunting.
I have no doubt.
And we started it from nothing. As I said, we have 45 partners now. And as a result of this last trip that I made, the state agency in Missouri, the state agency in Indiana are both going to join. We already have Florida, Texas, Nevada, Wyoming, Arizona, Alaska. I mean, these are all state governments that are funding this program. In addition to that, we have a huge number of business partners. We also have a huge number of NGOs, the Elk Foundations and the Wild Turkey or the Wild Sheep Foundations and the Dallas Safari Clubs and so on and so forth. And we're going to continue to build this and make it the most important program in North America. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is now coming to us for the data.
That's awesome.
And we have the U.S. Forest Service now also as a major partner with us. And I just held meetings with Texas A&M University, and I feel pretty confident. And Texas Wildlife Agency is also a partner, by the way. But I believe that we will have Texas A&M University as a partner very soon.
So we can put the website in the show notes. So
Yeah,
guys can
100%.
go and look for this and understand it. And
any way we can help, obviously, we want to help with that.
It's something we're all about. You know, and I'm looking down the table at everybody. If I'm being honest, I'm kind of new to the eating. I've been more. I'm looking for antlers.
Yes, you have.
For most of my hunting career.
But you ate it.
I mean, I would always make sure it got eaten.
Right.
I mean, even if I might give it away to somebody, but I made sure it was eaten.
Eaten, that's right.
But
we've converted you.
I've kind of made that change.
He's got Mahoney jelly on his desk right now. I saw it this morning. So.
Yeah, I do. Well,
the other really important point about this program is this. We are soon going to launch a major study with the U.S. Forest Service on looking at the food provision and capacity of national forests in the United States for the first time in the history of that organization. And when you think about all the berry pickers and the wild plant foragers, the medicinal plant foragers, the shed antler foragers, the firewood foragers, the artists who get, the burls for, developing, all of that coming from nature. This is our chance to bring all of those foragers and harvesters together. And we build that alliance, and we have a political alliance 10 times more formidable than just the 4%.
No doubt.
That represents the community in the United States or Canada.
That's
exciting.
Strong. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
I mean, it really is.
But what's so cool is strategically, as in any great initiative, there is a singular boss, a singular mission, a singular
focus.
What you serve that unites them all. And actually, the most powerful thing we could be united for, because it goes back to our literal existence that we're in support of and doing these things when you get to the bottom of it. So.
Mr. Mahoney, I can't believe we hadn't crossed paths yet. That our company, Mossy Oak, and all that we've got going on, I just can't believe we hadn't.
Well, we kind of keep our head down, focused on the job at hand.
We got to get him down here and go hunt.
We need to get him down here and let him experience a spring turkey
spring
hunt or
morning.
something.
Ninth cabin, some fried.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We did have a little bit of discussion a number of years ago at the SHOT Show one time, but conversations, they happen, and then they sometimes, they dip, and just like anything natural in the world, conversations the same way. Maybe this will be a way of reigniting some of those conversations, because obviously the perspectives around the table, but I remember very well even that brief conversation that we had. Your personal viewpoints, Toxie, were very well articulated at that time too, about how you feel about the natural world. And, in a lot of ways, it's funny because we started talking early in this podcast about the history of things. A lot of ways what's happening is we're starting to return to a more kind of indigenous or hunter-gatherer kind of view of the earth.
Awakening.
And
love it.
Yeah, and I think it's a beautiful thing. Yeah, and in some ways, the scientist, in us is becoming part shaman, and the shaman in the hunter-gatherer societies that still exist is becoming part scientist.
Yeah.
It's quite a beautiful thing that's actually starting to take place in the earth. And this is why I say also that, if I walk past a garden and I see an elderly lady, that doesn't have to be elderly, but often it is an elderly lady or an elderly man out, just tending their gardens, growing vegetables or maybe just growing flowers. And, to me, they're doing something incredibly meaningful. First of all, they love it. They love to have their hands in the dirt. They love to see if there's earthworms in their soil. They love to see how their plants are growing, etc. They become knowledgeable about what plants are edible, about what plants aren't, how to keep their plants from being choked by weeds, how to keep their soil healthy. I mean, that's just as important a contribution as somebody like I make to this effort, as far as I'm concerned. And so that's and food, of course, food of all kinds is extremely important. And we do have vegan now, people who chose that diet, who are also starting to incorporate more and more wild meat into their diet, and so on and so forth. And I really believe this is the future. And I tell you, having just come off some landscapes in Texas where people have managed the land for a long period of time and so forth, we all know that we can do things that improve habitat for turkey, or improve habitat for quail, or improve habitat for elk, or whatever it might be. I am of the opinion that we could generate far more wildlife food off this continent if our first and primary focus on land was to view land as a food provisioning system.
No
Above all
question.
else. Yeah. And for people and wildlife, just a food provisioning system. And what that would force us to do at the same time, because we talked about habitat earlier, that forces us to think about habitat and think about ecosystems, right? How to keep it all working and how to keep it all intact. And I think that's a beautiful mission for the earth. I think it's a beautiful mission for the nations of the earth. I think it's a beautiful mission for the institutions of the world, from the World Wildlife Fund to the International Monetary Fund. I don't care who they are. Mm-hmm. And so I think that we, on this food mission, we're trying to make a difference, and we are now taking this into the international policy space and pointing out, don't just think it is, groups of indigenous peoples, for example, in the Amazon or Congo Basin, who are harvesting wild food. The American and Canadian hunter, under the North American model system, is harvesting an enormous amount of wild food every single year. If you trace that back to 1920, you think about what that has added up to since 1920 or 1910, and think about the number of family meals that have been held, and for people in different parts of both our countries, like where I come from, this food is critically important. It's a major part of the food security system that we have still to this day.
It's helping people make budgets work.
No doubt about it. I mean,
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Why I've been doing it my whole life.
Yeah. You mentioned how people are more into managing their land like it's a food source.
Yeah.
And that's so true. We see that among our types around here. It used to be all about how are we going to grow big and healthy deer, and now it's about how are we going to have a diverse ecosystem that can have habitat for everything, whether it be.
And how can you play a part in that?
Well,
not take away from it, but actually add to it.
That's what I get excited about. What we've been able to achieve to a degree, it could just be so much bigger based on his vision. But it's becoming what Dudley's talking about. All of that's not just hunting, but everything it's become fun. It's become a pastime. I almost said being a gamekeeper is like a sport now. It's like, golf or tennis or ping pong. I mean, it's a sport. And so I'm saying it's a pastime that you love, and you in doing things to the earth to create more, a life of abundance from it. Yeah. And, it goes way beyond just, more animals to shoot. Way beyond that.
That's right.
So when I started months ago trying to contact Mr. Mahoney, and I knew if we could have him on here that he could help edify us and our audience and help raise us to another plane of knowledge of what's going on and how to improve ourselves.
Well, it also energizes me, especially because you see how what we do just by our own, we're just us being us. That's all we'll ever be. But how that fits in and really makes so much sense in today's world in enabling everybody and welcoming everybody into this conversation,
Yeah. Just watched a video on meatballs made out of Nutri-Rats.
I'm not going to go there.
Come on, Bobby. That's your next step.
Hey, Mr. Mahoney, true or false? Nutria have nipples on their back.
I guess that's true.
Yeah, well, look at here. Isn't that amazing? So and that's the way nature made them, so that a mother can nurse while she's swimming along. How about that?
That's probably why Bobby wouldn't eat one, because it would weird him out.
I'm going to make you some Nutria meatballs.
I'm not going to eat a Nutria. But I will go back and say that what I have learned through the years is that this is no shock to anybody, but it's so delicious.
It is. It's just delicious.
Everything but Nutria. I'm going to put a caveat on.
We're going to make you some Nutria.
But you don't know. You haven't tried it.
You haven't tried it. That's right.
I don't know. Yeah.
The best way to get any invasive species under control is
to
turn
it
good. Turn it into a good food source.
Yeah, that's absolutely true.
Mr. Mahoney, are you guys in Canada? I wanted to say y'all, but I'm going to try not to say y'all.
You can say y'all. That's fine.
We can translate. We get a translator for him.
Are y'all having some of these issues with non-natives in terms of plants and even animals that we have here in the United States?
Oh yeah, it's massive, and it's all over the world. It's it's a massive problem. And right here in Newfoundland, we've now been invaded only in the last 10 years in our coastal areas by a small green crab that probably came from Asia, and it's a voracious little character, and it's making a huge difference in our natural system. I mean, that's just the latest. But if you look at globally, the impact of these invasive species, and it's almost impossible to stop. We're moving around so much. We have so much moving around the planet in so many different ways. I mean, there was recently a South African pilot that had to make an emergency landing in his aircraft because he had a cobra sitting under his seat in his airplane.
That'll put
so what's moving around, and so yes, we do have the same problems. There's no
who gets it right is New Zealand, because I remember, because it was like mid-90s when I was there, but they inspected your boots to make sure there wasn't even 1 gram of dirt coming in from your country. You couldn't bring in anything at all. And they're so protective of their environment.
Have they been able to keep that?
I think so. He would know better than me, but I think so. I think they're just as strict as ever.
Some do a lot better jobs than others. But of course, again, in New Zealand's case, they introduced a lot of different species to their system that weren't there before. And they had a lot of problems as a result of that. So I think they very early on learned, and a lot of them were game species, but they just exploded, of course, as they came into a new setting. So they learned very early on about this and became quite strict about it. And they have a beautiful country, and they've done a great job of keeping it beautiful. But it's interesting, if you look at the places that have the highest incidence of invasive species, one of the categories of places that has that everywhere in the world are parks, and particularly national parks that are visited by so many people from so many different places. and they just track in these plant seeds and so on and so forth on their shoes and boots or in their backpacks or whatever it might be. So that's it's kind of an ironic thing, isn't it, that the places that we often were preserved to maintain the pristine natural beauty that they had have often become the places where we have the greatest numbers, at least in diversity of invasive species taking hold. And I think that just gives us another perspective on the complexity of what we're trying to deal with. I mean, conservation is the most complex business in the world. It intersects politics, culture, economics, religion, spirituality, every aspect of life, politics, every aspect of our existence has to be taken into account and weighs upon the balance of conservation. And so sometimes I smile when people think that, I don't know, the business world in terms of banking or international finance or something like that is more complicated. I will maintain till the day I die that there's nothing as complicated as conservation. And as a result of that, we have to realize that it's only if all of us work for it that it can happen, right? You can look at all the conservation problems in the world, and in my view, you can break them down to just three. And I don't care whether we're talking Africa or the United States of America or Vietnam or Northern Canada or Peru or Slovenia. It doesn't matter. We have three problems. One is that too few people care. And the second is that the people who do care are divided and fighting amongst themselves for the conservation space.
Amen there.
The third thing is we don't have enough money. But it's not because the world doesn't have enough money. It's not because we don't have enough money. Collectively, humanity has enough money. We do. We just are not spending enough on the conservation side of things. And I am convinced that if we could solve the first problem, that too few people care, we would then find the money, because governments and other institutions would be forced essentially to provide that kind of money that we need. And we don't need the world's entire GDP. We need a tiny percentage of additional money, 500 billion, maybe 100 billion. These are not big figures to really make a massive difference in conservation all over the world on an annual basis. I mean, that is no bigger than the personal fortunes of some individuals living today.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah, there's certain states. I believe Missouri has a small portion of the state tax goes to conservation, and it seems to be working very well for them. They have more money, and
they do.
So what do you think an answer is to make more people care? How can we as hunters lead by example?
Well, I think you're doing a pretty damn good job of it yourselves.
Thank you.
Nice. One of the biggest problems we have in the hunting community, of course, is that we have a lot of conservation-minded hunters. It is true. But it is not true to say that every hunter is a conservationist.
No.
That is simply not true.
No.
So, what we have to try to do, in my opinion, is to do what the women's movement did in the United States of America in the 1920s around the issue of the killing of herons and other giant wading birds. There was a huge industry in the United States of killing those birds in their rookeries, in their nesting habitat, leaving all the chicks to die, killing all the adults when they were on the nests. And the reason for doing it was to connect feathers to be used in women's hats, which were a big part of the fashion of the time. When the women's movement began for the right to vote in the United States of America, one of the things that they took on was this issue of the slaughter of these wading birds, the herons and storks and so on and so forth, that you have such a diversity of in the southern U.S. And they took that upon as one of their challenges to demonstrate they were legitimate in their hope for the vote, because they could take on what they considered to be a major issue for society. And in joining with the Audubon Society, what they did is they made it they made it so that if you wore one of those hats as a woman, you were ostracized, you were blacklisted, you were held up as doing something that was not in the best interest of the country and of its natural resources, and so on and so forth. And I think what we have to try to do, not only in the hunting community, but generally, is first of all to be inclusive of people of all views. And I even include in this, by the way, and I know you probably don't like this, but people, not everybody who's an anti-hunter is just out there for money and prestige. Mm-hmm. There are people who just have that viewpoint. They believe in that honestly, and they work as best they can.
Absolutely. No doubt about it. Yes.
And so being inclusive as you are being is critically important. Secondly, making sure that all the benefits, these beautiful heads, who doesn't like looking at antlers? I mean, my God almighty, they're fascinating things. But that these are all outcomes of a conservation process.
Yes.
They're not the end of the conservation process, right? And they should inspire us more to do more for conservation, and not think that we only use conservation to create more of them. I mean, it's all entwined, but you know what I mean? It's a different perspective. And I think the other thing is we need to understand that everybody, every American citizen, if I had my way, I would, some people said I should run for politics, but because that's the only way to get your message to everybody. I don't know if that's true or not. But I don't intend to do it, by the way. I got enough problems now.
You don't have to worry about me.
But if we could just, from the very beginning in school, I'm not talking about teaching outdoor skills. I'm not teaching hunting and angling. I'm not talking about teaching archery. That's all fine. But it's really not the main issue. If we could start teaching little humans when they first start going to school, as well as in our own homes, just about the value of nature and the fact that is every time you sing your national anthem, you put your hand over your heart, you are thinking about part of that is the natural wonders of the United States of America. I believe if we started there and then had not just one effort like you have here, but 1,000 efforts like you have here, every podcast in hunting and conservation was talking about the same kind of issues. If everybody was open to having, foragers and gardeners and ranchers and farmers and, anybody who works with the land brought together about this, then that's how we're going to make the difference. And, people got to set aside one really major mistake they make in their thinking, that it's about killing. That's a central part of this. It has to be about conservation of the earth and conservation of natural systems that eventually provide us with this kind of food and sustenance. And they have to realize that even when people are often opposed to hunting, it is not necessarily that they are against the killing of wildlife. They are often against the attitudes that they see some hunters profess.
Exactly.
That they lump everybody together. Because if you think about it, if you ask most people in the world, and certainly if you ask most Americans and you ask most Canadians, do they admire ranchers? Do they admire cowboys? The vast majority of people in the United States of America are going to say, yes, I do. I think that's a worthwhile way for a family to make a living, and I think it's a beautiful lifestyle, and I do admire them. And they think about the images of the cowboys, rescuing those little calves in snowstorms, all that kind of lore that's out there. And it's not just lore, it actually happens. But every one of the animals that those ranchers raise, every single one is raised to die for food. And every human being knows it. So if it's about the killing, how come there isn't this massive kind of movement against those lifestyles?
They like steak.
Excellent point.
Right.
Great point.
He's exactly right too. It's not. It's the people and their attitudes, and actually, disrespect begets disrespect, and so if someone who hunts is disrespectful to someone that is anti-killing, if we don't really love these animals, I'm probably get people that won't like what I'm fixing to say, but if we don't really love these animals, we shouldn't be able to pursue them and hunt them.
No,
And make it a
damn
lifestyle.
right.
So at the same time, you have someone who's a animal rights person, and they really love animals. Well, I'm an animal rights person, even though I love to hunt and fish.
Yeah, and eat them.
And I love the animals. I mean, I will almost have a wreck. I don't want to have a wreck and hurt my family, but to keep from hitting a squirrel or something, it just makes me cry, to hit a bird in the grill of my car. I mean, I love animals, all forms of it.
Yeah.
So my point in saying this, we can look, if somebody is an animal rights person and they are brutally disrespectful, I mean, they're going to get what they deserve. And the same for us. If we're disrespectful, if someone is a animal rights and a animal lover, and they're pure about that, and they just kind of have a problem with the fact that we kill animals, we should be able to swim alongside of that and empathize with them and understand that. We don't all have to agree to get along. Why do we? To me, that's what's wrong with the world right now, because so many people, if you don't believe what I believe, you're just stupid. And that attitude is out there everywhere. Well, my disrespect, if you give off disrespect, just get ready to get it back.
Yeah, I totally agree.
We this may be too controversial, but we don't.
Throw it
one
out there,
thing you
Dud.
don't see with the ranchers is they don't show off when they take the life of their animal.
No,
you see that a lot in the hunting community, especially now that we have social media.
Yep.
How we glorify the kill shot.
Or even, and I've been guilty of this. You kill a big buck and you would leave the tailgate down on the truck so people behind you could see.
It's okay.
Well, you're proud.
I've done that, but probably don't need to do that anymore.
Well, Southern culture too, it's okay in West Point.
I think that's okay. I mean, there's other way more important matters of the heart.
Yeah.
Than whether you took a little pride in the deer was a big deer or not. I think it's great, honestly. But it all has to work in concert, to his point.
It is a celebration, though.
Down the road,
the harvest.
we could be in serious trouble of losing what we love if it isn't kept in balance.
So, look, guys, we've been going a while.
Yes.
Well, let's keep on going.
Well, yeah, we are. So, Mr. Mahoney, why don't you lean back in your chair just a minute? We're gonna have you on again. I can just feel this coming. But I'd like to learn a bit about Mr. Mahoney. Dudley's got some questions that he'll rapid fire at you. We have a segment called Rapid Fire. It's brought to you by Springfield Armory,
and it's fun.
But we learn a little bit about you, and you'll enjoy this, I think.
So he'll throw a couple things at you. You can pick one or the other. You can say neither or both.
So I normally say, this or that, and you have to pick one. I changed it up a little bit this time, so it should be fun. So we just want to get to know you a little better. So are you ready?
Oh, yeah, I'm
okay.
ready.
Canadian bacon or American bacon?
Canadian, definitely.
Eggs, scrambled or fried?
Fried.
Favorite wild mushroom?
Chanterelles.
Nice.
Maple syrup or honey?
Maple syrup.
Favorite wild jelly or jam species? What's your favorite?
We have a berry here in Newfoundland called the bake apple. I don't know what you would call it elsewhere. It grows on very marshy ground, and it costs now about $150 a gallon.
Okay.
In the local market.
Expensive jam.
Well, we need to look in that.
No, we pick it ourselves. It's called bake apples.
Okay. The last book you read, or possibly a recent favorite?
The one I'm reading now is Catherine the Great, the biography of Catherine the Great of Russia. I spent a lot of time.
Favorite genre of music?
Rock and roll.
Okay.
Nice.
If you were forced to choose between hunting both feathered animals or fur animals, which would you choose?
I choose the furred animals.
Okay.
Nice.
What's your favorite snack in the woods?
Oh, favorite snack in the woods, probably roasted salt fish. We carry salt fish with us a lot. We roast it over the fire. So
There you go. Okay. Name a hobby of yours that isn't really related to your profession. You may be too busy.
He works too much.
Well, I mean, I have some hobbies such as photography and writing and so on and so forth, but they're kind of all related to my profession. But I would say perhaps if there was one that's not directly related to my profession, it would be my indulgence in literature and my indulgence in the world of history.
Okay.
Not
Wonderful. All right. Well, that's it.
Yeah, you
Good
did
job.
good.
Yeah.
You did good.
Is Canadian bacon what's on a? What is Canadian bacon? Is it the ham?
It just doesn't look.
It's all meat and not you know,
Oh, it doesn't
80%
have
fat.
fat. Got it.
Maybe he
They're
would know.
round, I think.
Yeah, it's not what you get on an egg McMuffin.
It could be
Cured in a different way.
You often get it on, eggs Benedict. for
Oh
example.
yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
love those. Yeah, okay, gotcha.
Anyway. But don't get me wrong, I like American bacon too. I like pig anyway.
Pig is pretty tasty.
All right, Mr. Mahoney, we got one more thing we're gonna do. We've got we're gonna ask you a trivia question. Everybody thinks I'm always trying to trick the guest, and I'm not.
Because you are too.
Yeah.
I'm
He's
really
already
wanting
nailed
you.
the Nutri-Rack question.
He did. I'm wanting you to help educate our audience a little bit about Newfoundland. So I'm going to ask you a question. So our producer Richie will ask you the question, but if you get it right, one of our listeners who have left us a review will win a prize. So
What's the prize this week?
yeah, the prize this week is we've got some GameKeeper luggage tags.
Nice.
They're beautiful, and we'll get those in the mail to the.
And some biologic T-shirts.
Well, we got those as well. That's right. Thank you for reminding me of that, Lanny. Richie, I'm gonna turn it to you. Can you?
Are those prizes from Toxie's Closet as well?
Well, Toxie's sitting here, so you're not supposed to say that, Richie. Please.
So our listener here is Ethan Hall 1107, just for out there. So here's the question. So there is an alcoholic drink that has been known to the Newfoundland for generations. In fact, some people even travel there to get it. What is the name of this drink? I think you just said it.
Screech.
There you go.
Screech.
Yeah.
Screech?
That's it. It's called Screech.
Ah,
And I think the only place you can get it is there.
what's it made out of?
It's black rum.
Ah,
The Barbados black rum. It was part originally of the rum trade that was the trade for saltfish, black rum, and actually slaves. That was a triangle of economy that at one time was in existence.
Wow.
And the barrels of rum that would be brought in, we would soak them out to literally withdraw the rum from the empty barrels for this really high alcohol black rum that's called Screech. And this was the only place you could get it, and that's the name of it. And right on the bottle, that's what it says. It says Screech. And it's,
Doesn't that sound delicious?
yeah, I thought so. Go with some Nutri-Rack. Yeah.
Yeah.
well, I tell you, when you travel, we often get surrounded by ice, of course, and icebergs, and those icebergs bring down 10,000-year-old ice to us, and all those icebergs, of course, are totally fresh water.
Huh.
And so we go out and we chip off the ice off the icebergs and put it in our deep freezes, and then when we have a drink, we put 10,000-year-old ice,
Nice.
10,000 in our drinks. And so when you have a glass of Coke with 10,000-year-old ice, yeah, I'd say it's pretty good.
That's cool. Yeah.
That's really cool.
That is
Well,
really
when you
cool.
go to Newfoundland sometime, we'll make sure you have some.
Have some Screech.
So people travel up there to get screeched, and that's kind of thing. But look, so I want to tell if Mr. Mahoney, if you'll indulge me just one moment.
Just
I wanna,
one more time.
Yeah, one more time. I want to tell a story. So if y'all can imagine back, I'm about 26 years old.
Roberto.
I've seen the video.
Yes.
Roberto.
So, and Mossy Oak was going then. It wasn't but a couple years old, but I was head to toe in Bottomland. But I traveled to Newfoundland and got to hunt and meet a man named Dave Evans.
Mm-hmm.
And he and I became fast friends. In fact, he came to my, when I got married, he came to my wedding.
You didn't even invite me to your
But
wedding.
no, I didn't. But this was he lives in St. John's, and he actually was on the Edmund Fitzgerald, Which brings me to another point. Gordon Lightfoot's one of my favorite singers, but he's Canadian as well. But anyway, so I was invited up there, Mr. Mahoney. I was on a moose hunt, and I had purchased a moose tag, and it was pretty expensive, if I remember right.
Yeah.
And so I'm up there, and Dave Evans, we hunt it's a 7-day hunt, and about 5 days into this hunt, we have not seen a moose. And we're walking across what you guys call a bog up there.
Right, yeah.
And we get to this rock, and Dave said he's got this really unique accent, and he says, "Oh boy, get down. There's a big stag out there." Mm-hmm. And this stag was a woodland caribou. And he says, "Watch this." And he pulls out a white towel. And this is in November, and the stags are rutting. This is a woodland caribou. And he starts walking behind me with this white rag, and this stag comes running in.
Behind you?
Yes. No, he comes running into it.
Right.
He sees that white, and he thinks it's another stag, and he comes charging in. Well, as the bull gets closer, stag gets closer, Dave leans down to me and goes, "Oh my goodness, I wish you had a caribou tag." And I said, What? He said, "That's the biggest one I've ever seen."
Wow.
He said, "It's for sure a Boone and Crockett." And we kept on, and he said, "That may be the world record woodland caribou." So at this point, I don't have a tag.
You didn't have your iPhone back then.
No, I didn't have an iPhone. So it tells you what kind of character this guy is. I mean, he was like.
So you're feeling bad now. You should have said, "That caribou will make more sausage than any caribou I've ever seen."
Yeah, that could have. So there's no way to buy.
Right.
So we talk about the options, and there are no options. We can't shoot him. And this guy, he's an upstanding guy, and he's like, maybe next year you can come back, and we can come back here and
run
hunt.
to town, get your tag, come back.
So we don't shoot this stag, and he goes off. And so that's been 30 years ago, and once or twice a year, I get a text from Dave Evans, and we talk about something, and he always, without me reminding him, he says, "Do you remember that big stag?"
He's still in his mind.
It is. I mean, he really thought it could have been the world. That was my brush with a chance to.
You just bought the wrong tag.
Brought the wrong tag. But a caribou tag was $600 30 years ago. I remember it.
Well,
did you get your moose?
Did you get your moose?
I did get a moose.
They're non-existent now.
I sure did. The last morning of the hunt, I killed a moose. We had not seen a moose all 7 days. Actually, listen to this now. We had not seen another person for 7 days. And I shot one time and killed this moose. He's laying there. He looks like a Volkswagen. He's so big laying on the ground. Toxie, you've killed a moose,
Yep.
And I'm just
Volkswagen van.
What are we going to do now? And out of the woods comes two guys wearing blue Dickie overalls, and they've got 20-ounce beers in every pocket. And, I mean, we're like, where did they all come from? And they said, "Hey, if you'll give us some meat, we'll help you tote it out." And we said, "Hey, come on."
So they heard the shot and showed up.
Yes.
Like Strange Brew.
Don't know where they came from. Have you ever heard of something like that happening, Shane?
What, Newfoundlanders showing up with beer in their pockets? Yeah, I've heard that a lot.
Well, look, I just want to encourage guys. Newfoundland is an interesting place, a great place to go hunting, and you should check it out. And
have some screech and some 10,000-year-old ice.
I'm sure Mr. Mahoney would advocate for Newfoundland being a really neat place for a guy to go on an adventure.
Sweet.
Well, I'll tell you now, not this summer, but next summer we'll hold another in-person wild harvest meeting of all the partners, all 45 or whatever. It'll be more than that then. So maybe we keep talking, and maybe you guys will all be there.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Who knows?
Daniel right up there.
Yep, probably would.
Yeah, we would. So, Mr. Mahoney, we're gonna send you a care package. It's gonna have. We revived an old brand that Mossy Oak had called Mossy Oak Companions. And it'll be your favorite shirts. So we're gonna be watching in the. I don't know how we'll get it to you, but UPS or
Polar Express.
Yes, but you and Amanda, I'll make sure y'all get some. And but we've enjoyed having you, and I know we want to have you again.
Yeah, 100%. I appreciate the perspective. Thinking about what you said. About really where we really came from is puts a lot of perspective in it for me.
Absolutely.
Well, I've greatly enjoyed it. myself. So I appreciate you having me on, and I'd be delighted to come back anytime.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I'm gonna give you a chance. Is there anything else anything you need to promote or talk about, or anybody you need to say hello to? Or?
No, I don't think so. I'm just grateful for the opportunity. I firmly believe that it's conversations like this that change the world, and that we often underestimate the capacity of a few people to make a big difference. And I think the values that you're professing on this are exactly the kind of values that will carry us forward. And so I think I just spent 2 hours of my life doing a very good thing.
Oh, wow.
Wow.
Likewise.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Chill
Yeah.
bumps.
Thank you very, very, very much.
So this is our 150th episode of Gamekeepers, and I think this may be the best message we've had.
Perfect 150.
It really is.
Our sesquicentennial.
Yes.
Ooh, look at there. That's
Look
a
at
big
that.
word.
Yeah.
Oh, Dudley. Where is it? Mr. Know-It-All.
Mr. Mahoney, we appreciate you so much, and
Thanks for what you're doing out
we
there.
will stay in
Yes.
touch.
No doubt about it.
Thank you for a life of making a difference.
Yeah, no doubt.
True.
Thanks to you all.
Yes, sir.
Thank you
Good
so
luck.
much. We're honored.
Yeah.
Wow.
Thank you.
What a
All
guy.
right.
Yeah. Thank you. Now. What
Get it off.
an interesting guy.
Yeah, you know what he said about our cathedral, our cathedrals being these natural wild places, that we have access to. Some things just rip your.
Yeah, but all outdoors is that cathedral.
Yeah, I mean,
it
that's
doesn't
what
have
I'm
to
saying.
be Yellowstone.
No, I know, but that's what I'm saying, because I think
Yeah.
the cathedral for me is not Yellowstone. It's actually where I live.
That's right.
You know what I mean? So,
Yep.
and as comparing that to the cathedrals of old over there, that's just some really interesting perspective.
Yeah. And he had a lot of those.
We live in times where hunters can really make a difference in what we love.
Mm-hmm.
More so than ever. I think if we've all made mistakes. We've made mistakes as a group. It's just part of life.
Yeah.
But we learn from them. And I think today we can make such a big difference in what we love. I say it all the time, to have lived a life and had a chance. Not a lot of people don't get to do that.
No.
They just have to go work and do. But to make a difference in what you really love is such a rare gift with life.
Yep. This was a
Amen.
good one. Dudley, you got anything else to add?
I don't. I'm just kind of.
I'm ready to go plant something now.
Yeah.
You got any
Fact,
tomatoes in the ground?
I'm not. It's not a competition, Lanny. He got
It's
so
just
offended.
good.
I showed him. I had red tomatoes like in the last of April one year.
You've been doing that forever.
Yeah.
And Vandy.
It's not a contest.
He
but
and
showed-
Van.
He just wants to win.
I'm hungry.
Whatever.
Oh, me. Well, this has been a good one. We've
Great
been
one.
going a long time. We appreciate everybody listening. Guys, we really do take y'all serious. And please email in some suggestions for topics, and we'll
Yeah.
attack them.
If anybody knows Hank Williams Jr., Bobby's trying to get in touch with him.
Yeah, please.
Well, we're working on another famous musician. Not going to
Oh,
say
that's
his
right.
name,
I forgot
but
about that.
No,
I don't want anybody to snag him.
don't jinx it.
Yeah. So email us at gamekeepers@mossyoak.com if you've got a show topic you would like us to look at. We've had several people have done that recently, and appreciate that for sure.
Good deal.
So,
Sweet.
that's it. I think we all learned something. I think anybody that listens to this can learn something for sure. So we'll get on out of here. Why don't you say goodbye, Dudley?
Goodbye, Dudley.
Get us out of here, Richie.
Thanks for tuning in to this week's episode of the Gamekeeper Podcast, and be sure to tune in again. Subscribe to Gamekeeper Farming for Wildlife magazine, and don't miss the Mossy Oak Properties Fistful of Dirt podcast with my good buddy, Ronnie Cuz Strickland.